Harold Ramis was directing it. He was attached to it, and so they Harold was just starting pre-production to cast, and so they had already committed to making it, and Harold didn't want to make it with Tim Allen. And they got into a little thing, and Harold left the project. So Mark, who's kind of brilliant at this, kept them, trying to hire people or trying to put an office together, and very sweetly, because he said, now you might be able to do this because we just lost our director. So come in and meet meet Tim, and we'll talk about it. And so I came in. It was, I think, 7 or 8 weeks before production.
Wow.
And I went back to the. I went back actually to a little bit backwards to the script I had liked. We changed the ending to some degree, and we changed it a little bit. But I loved Bob Gordon. I'm still great friends with Bob. I thought he was just a brilliant writer also, and that he's one of those people who dots every I. It's like everything comes back, right? So by Grabthar's hammer, which he hates to say, Alan Rickman's character, now that comes back as something incredibly dramatic that he's saying to his dying friend, who's a fan, who he's now, it basically is like his son. So all of that writing of Bob's is sort of brilliantly constructed, I thought, and so I jumped in. There was nobody else cast; it was just Tim, and so I went and talked to Tim, met Tim, and said, I look at this as a drama, and he's like, oh yeah, right. He's like laughing at me, like, yeah, sure you do. And I'm like, no, it's like, he goes, well, I mean, there are little moments in it that might be dramatic. And I'm like, no, I'm going to approach it that way. He's like, looking at me, where I go, okay. And then I started casting. The first person I went after was Alan Rickman, who I just adored and loved.
Oh,
and then Sigourney, who apparently had been wanted to do it, and I thought was brilliant for the part. I didn't think she would ever say yes. But Mark and I met Sigourney in New York, and she immediately said yes. And then I started casting everybody else, and Sammy Rockwell, I'd known a little bit in New York. He'd done a little independent with John Turturro called Box of Moonlight, and he's just brilliant. I knew Tony Shalhoub. He was actually a neighbor of mine, and he also brilliant. And we just kept that entire cast. Chill came from Home Prize, Daryl Chill Mitchell, and so. I just started assembling cast, and we quickly built and rebuilt one of the sets that Harold had started, which was in Harold's tone and not in mine. And so I bent it back into my direction. And I remember Tim, for the first week, he's like, "Oh, this is going straight to video," and then he started seeing what I was doing, and then to his credit, he absolutely rose to that occasion. He really, it turned out that Tim was a really which I find in a lot of people who started in stand-up or come from comedy, was a wonderful actor, absolutely wonderful. There's a scene at the end of Galaxy Quest where he has to tell Mathazon that he's a liar. He's a fake.
Yeah.
And that even on the set, that was incredibly emotional. Although Alan Rickman would give Tim, crap all the time. Oh God, he just discovered acting. He said, but he was he really, I thought, worked very hard, as did everybody. And then they all became a great little, which is the trick, I think, on any movie.
Yeah.
Is everybody gets on the train, and they all got on the train together, and they all, most of the time when we weren't working, they were somewhere laughing. And they all stayed friends. That whole group of actors stayed friends for years, as did I with them. We all, I think also DreamWorks at that time was trying to make Gladiator, and Gladiator was having all kinds of problems, so they ignored me. So I was I was running wild. We basically stayed on budget, but we I think they were worried at first because I was an unknown.
Yeah.
So we sent them. I sent them one scene cut together, and they seemed to calm everybody down that I was making the movie.
Yeah.
And then they went off and dealt with Gladiator. When they came back, it was mostly. I remember Steven Spielberg showing up during that scene, and he'd only shown up once or twice before because he was an incredibly generous filmmaker, and he understood that if he was there, I would be intimidated by it.
Oh yeah.
And he was incredibly supportive by not injecting himself into the process. He was there it's like, anything you need, just come and talk to me. But he was not, he was also busy doing a lot of other things. He's Steven Spielberg, so what does he want to do on my set? But he was incredibly sweet and generous. And I remember when I first met him, it was like, oh my God, I'm meeting Steven Spielberg. And then in about 5 minutes, we're just hanging out talking about movies and having fun and laughing about things. It's different working for a studio that's run by a filmmaker.
Yeah.
It's much different.
Yeah.
That was the best experience of making a movie and being able to make the movie that was in my brain that I imagined. That was the closest I've gotten. And it was a lot of that was because of DreamWorks, and Mark Johnson and that group of people. It was just also the luck of that moment,
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, I don't know if you know about Dean Perlman, who directed House of Sand and Fog.
I know of him. I don't know him.
I was speaking to him too. An amazing movie, like an amazing movie.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
And that he was in a similar shoe as you were. That was his first film too. And that's the thing that I always hear. And I remember even when I was running the website, the reason DreamWorks succeeded, among many other things, was there was less, I shouldn't say less, but it was, like you said, like made by filmmakers. So they understood, run by filmmakers. So they understood what filmmakers go through.
Yeah,
right?
They understood the process.
Yeah. I mean, to a studio, like, you're sitting in the office. I don't know if you've ever seen that new series that came out a few months ago. What is it called? The Godfather one, the one they made about how The Godfather was made.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so they showed the Paramount executive and how people in the office, how they just have no clue what's going on the set, but it's all about numbers, right? I mean, that's their job. But going back to Galaxy Quest, Dean, what I loved about that film, I think you mentioned that, is that the characters were so opposite of each other and so well written that they just worked. Like, you look at the guy played by Sam Rockwell, and then you look at Tony, who I don't remember his character. I think it was Fred that he played.
Yeah, Fred Kwan.
Yeah, they were complete opposite. Like, he was as calm and cool while the chaos was going on, and when there was nothing bad going on, Sam's character was all over the place. And there was that chemistry that you could tell, like you mentioned, right? It was just so evident. And the humor that I was talking about was not necessarily like humor, like, for example, like Dumb and Dumber type humor. It was a very intellectual, smart humor. So I just want to say that what I'm trying to say was fabulous that you did that, I guess.
Oh, thanks. That's very kind. I was trying.
No, I'm not an original Star Trek fan, but I grew up watching Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Right.
So when I saw the trailer, I still remember how I reacted. And when I showed it to my wife and my kids just like a few weeks ago, they didn't get it because they have not seen Star Trek, for that matter. But how much inspiration did you draw from? And I know there was definitely the older one that was in there a lot, like the way that William Shatner's character was. Were you a fan of Star Trek yourself? If so, which series, and how much of that kind of came in?
I was, but I also I was a fan of it when I was a kid. But then as a college student, we also mocked it, right? So, and yet we loved it at the same time. Because it's cheesy sets and over the top, and yet the ideas in Star Trek were actually quite sophisticated, and especially for that time. And I loved the writing in Star Trek. I was sucked into all of it. So I was a fan, maybe an odd fan in a weird way.
Not a Trekkie.
Yeah, not a Trekkie, but a fan of the storytelling and of the ideas behind it, especially, and of the idea of science fiction. Of a time when we're exploring and learning. So I loved all of it. I think I had seen all those. I'd seen a lot of science fiction by that point because I did love science fiction. So it wasn't. It was in my wheelhouse completely. Also, though, it's a story about actors and fans, right? And so I had been to just for research alone. I'd gone to some Star Trek conventions before, and also there's that great documentary about that woman who was cosplaying a Star Trek character that didn't really exist, that she called the Commander, and she was part of Bill Clinton's jury for his trial, one of his trials, and she dressed in full Star Trek and wanted to be called the Commander, and was part of the jury, and somehow ended up in the jury for a while anyway, before she was dismissed.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
So there's a lot of oddball behavior, oddball fan behavior behind it. But I'm a fan, right? So I love that quality we have as human beings to suspend disbelief, to immerse ourselves in something to that degree where we not just fall for it, we embrace it, and then we love it so much that we want to live with it all the time and talk about it, and share it. And that's the quality. It's a quality I think we all have to a certain degree, and it allows us to make and appreciate movies, right? That quality we have as humans, to lose ourselves in story.
Yes,
100%. So to me, it was a celebration of what we do, that movie.